was different than the NATA. I went with them. And unfortunately, in a court, now we're in a situation where they're arguing, so you're taking the word of a bunch of athletic trainers versus a bunch of neurologists? Who's wrong? That's the system. So it's all about building your defense. These are, don't read them all, but if you go to the NATA website, these are the position statements. Heat injury, asthma, administration. This is a great starting point when you're thinking about your practice and you say, how do I document? There's a standard for documentation. What do I do under asthma or lightning emergencies? Copy it, don't recreate it. There are experts that says, here's a lightning policy, but you have to use it. Because if it's not in the law, and it's not in the regulation, this is the next level. And NCAA, not a huge fan of the NCAA, particularly when it comes to athlete safety. It's not what they're about. They're about generating revenue. It has only been in the last 2 years that they have actively engaged in practices to protect athletes. What they do have that's good is the NCAA Sports Medicine Handbook. So if you work in a college, it has all of the guidelines that should be in your practice. I recommend every high school use it as a foundation too, or anyone in practice, because it's pretty good stuff. So now let me ask you, we've talked about a bunch of these things. What can you do as an athletic trainer?
Treat athletes.
Okay, I like it. What else? Go ahead.
Work under a
That's it. You're playing the game. What else?
Treat people so.
Can we do this?
No.
No. Why?
Not defined in the law.
Not in the Practice Act. Nothing was in the Practice Act. We just read it. Not in our skill set. Remember, hierarchy. Is it in the law? No. Was it in the regulation? No. What's next after regulations? Position statements? We're probably not sure about that. Let me ask the same question a different way. Go ahead.
But if it's not there, would that be considered gray area? Because it's not defined either way, so it's
correct.
not a
It
yes or no,
potentially
so.
could be. And I think I'll prove your point in a second. What if I ask it this way?
Yeah.
How do you make sure, knowing that this is nothing more than an injection, just like this, it's the same thing.
Life-saving.
So we have this clause about an emergency, right? So we can fit it under there. Did we see anything else that gave us authority to use an injectable?
Position, direction.
So because there's nothing else that says you can do this, you're taking that broad authority of an emergency, and you're going to make sure in your standing orders, you give yourself the authority to do this. You write it in. In the event of an anaphylactic emergency, the athletic trainer will do this, this, and this. Take vital signs. If they're within this realm, apply or assist the patient in applying their auto-injector of epinephrine, signed by the doctor. We have legal statutory authority to emergency procedures. Since this one isn't mentioned, we want to put us in a situation where we can defend it. My physician told me to do it. I've been educated to do it. In my academic programs, it's a standard in our education, and there's actually a position statement on it. Pretty good argument there.
I was gonna say, like, is that considered preventing death in athletes? Like, would that go under that? Even though it's not like probably mentioned in that, but it's
Well, sure, people die from anaphylaxis.
Yeah.
The only way to know is to not do it and see if they die,
right.
which probably isn't your best course of action. So I'm going to give you this, I think. This is really what we just talked about. It's a decision-making process, a flow chart that the board uses to determine if something is within the scope. And this is exactly what you should do in your practice. If there's an area you're concerned with, follow these steps. Oops. I'm not going to read it and go through it. You can do that on your time. You guys are smart. But it's really a simple process for what is one of the most complicated decisions or questions I get all the time. Can I do this? Can I do that? The one that's been floating around in Massachusetts the last 12 months, dry needling. You know what dry needling is? Within our scope? Not within our scope?
Maybe if you have a certificate.
All right, see, you're making stuff up.
No.
Process. Opinions are great. Follow the process. Is it in the statute? Not that we saw. Rules and regulations? No. Not that we saw. Position statements by professional associations?
Don't know.
Don't know yet. I know, because we've been studying this. I'm not willing to make an opinion on this one. My inclination is, at some point, this is what we're talking about. While it's not an injection, it's breaking the skin. It's a little ambiguous there. The question came up in relation to physical therapists, but the board oversees all disciplines, so the discussion involves everyone. Ultimately, and this goes to, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. Matt's name, Matt's question about, we have all of these associations. Why do I have to know them all? Because really, what we're responsible for is what is the acceptable medical standard of care. And that's what the community is doing. Community. Remember, in athletic training, it differs by state. So what's okay here might not be okay next door. Here are a couple of examples. Credentialing alone is different in every state. We have licensure. What's licensure? This you should know from our class, hopefully. It's the highest level. It determines who can do it and what they can do. Certification. Entry point. Says who can, what are you going to do to get into a profession? Doesn't say anything about what you can do when you're there. Registration. Just let us know. If you're going to do it, tell us about it. Any schmo. Exemption. Well, we don't want to regulate you. But we're not going to say you're being a physical therapist. If you do something that's under physical therapy, you're exempt. We're going to quickly go through some other language and state acts. Athletic trainers in New Jersey can use modalities provided they are under a plan of care designed and overseen by a physician. So if you work in New Jersey, what are you going to do to use a modality?
Have an order from a physician that outlines how.
Think about that. How many times your athlete strolls in, you throw on a little ultrasound, some electric stim, you put it in your plan. In Massachusetts, we do it all the time. Our standing orders from our physician will say, the athletic trainer under my direction can provide therapeutic modalities that they deem appropriate that's within their scope of care. I can do anything. New Jersey, the doctor has to come up with the plan. What a pain in the ass that is for them. In New York, you can only treat people, and this is what we were talking about at the beginning of the class, that suffers an athletic injury. Not an injury that impacts an athlete's participation. An athletic injury. What is that? Define an athletic injury for me. Is it, okay, an injury that occurs during athletics, or is it an injury that's commonly seen in athletics? Here's my example. I have a soccer player. He's stepping out of the shower. He slips, sprains his ankle. Is that an athletic injury?
Sprained ankle could be, but
Well, but what was your definition?
Yeah, it's not
Use?
athletic.
Right. So it didn't occur during athletics. However, if the interpretation is it's an injury that's common in athletics, you would say sprained ankle. I would say here, you can't treat the kid who sprains his ankle in the parking lot. If it's on the field, you're good. Ridiculous. Florida, another goofy one. We talked about the direction. Florida goes a step further. It says, you actually, before you practice, you have a written protocol for everything you do. In Massachusetts, we have the freedom to determine what direction is. We just have to be able to prove it in a reasonable way. The laws of Florida tell you what it is. You have a written protocol. Prior to the commencement of your practice as an athletic trainer, you have to develop the protocol. So that first day at the high school, just before preseason, You better have a protocol before you start. Rhode Island, our neighbors, God bless them, but boy, did they screw this up. Athletic injuries occur by athletes in preparation of or participating in athletic programs being conducted by an educational institution under the jurisdiction of an interscholastic athletic governing body, blah, 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 blah. This was physical therapists winning the fight. We're going to give them the authority to treat an injury that's an athletic injury in their gym at the time they were practicing, and that's it. What is a non-athletic or age-related condition? Because if it is, they can't touch it. Being old? What about Auschwitz-Ladders related to growth? Can't treat it. Tendinitis, muscle imbalance, growth disparities. I don't know. Right in their language, almost like Massachusetts, they limit their scope to those athletes participating in or preparing for athletic events. That clinic situation where you're running the running thing, not happening in Rhode Island. Can't even work in anything other than an educational institution. And only if those athletes are hurt in a practice or a game. And what's a practice or a game? Captain's practice on a Sunday. Is that approved, regulated, as a part of it? I don't know.
What if you do like tournaments?
What if?
Can you not do tournaments in Rhode Island?
Well,
As an athletic, hired as an athletic trainer?
so I would say that we've read the directing thing. So it has to be a school-sponsored, has to be affiliated with the school. So I think it depends. But this is a bigger picture, a bigger question. And we were going to get to this in a minute. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. But so you're hired to do a tournament. Can you do that? Let's just stick with Massachusetts because that's what we spent some time on today.
It's sponsored by an organization.
Okay, sponsored by an organization. Do you have an affiliation with it?
If I'm hired by
They're
them.
paying you. Okay, I'll buy that.
So I think like if you do per diem through like precision athletic training,
Yeah.
they make you have your insurance has to name them on your, you have to name them as the company on your insurance that they'll cover your work through them.
Right, so
And I
you're an
think
employee
that
of Precision.
I do
Yep.
believe that they have standing orders that apply to all of their higher
Yep.
athletic
So
trainers.
it's the
that-
same game. You're right.
Yeah.
So Precision actually does it right. There are those three things we said in the statute. Direction of, associated, or affiliation. That's all you have to demonstrate. I would question a broad directing statement by doctors. Because you have it, and now it becomes, well, we have these standing orders for our employees, because you're an employee of Precision when this is happening. If push comes to shove, is that how is that argument when the lawyer says, so you were directing someone you've never actually met? Did you ever review their credentials?
Wouldn't Precision athletic training review my credentials?
I would hope, and they do. But Precision isn't your directing physician. So it now becomes a more difficult argument. I'm not saying it's wrong. It certainly is close to meeting as you can get. But understanding that the whole process is adversarial. If something bad happens, it's an argument.
So it's the company's responsibility to provide that to you?
Oh, it's always if you're practicing, it's your responsibility, whether you get it through the company or not.
Okay.
But ultimately, so if you do anything per diem, you need a directing physician. However, through a company like Precision, you need some standing orders from that directing to show that you
And
can
show
do
that you have
that.
affiliation with them or that
Yeah.
they're willing to cover you.
Exactly. Yeah. And maybe that's just a sentence, but you want something. Whoever you're treating has to meet that definition of athlete, however you choose to define that in Massachusetts. And then there's that affiliation piece, which, again, assuming you're hired by the entity, that's a reasonable. Assuming they're not giving you $50 saying thanks.
Right.
You want an employment contract.
Like payroll and stuff like that.
Something that when the judge says, how are you affiliated? Oh, here, it says I'm going to work, they're going to give me $10. All right. So, with all of that said, here's my take-home message, and there's a lot more, but no matter what you do, you can be sued. There are no rules to suing someone. Anyone can say anything. The woman who sued McDonald's because the coffee's too hot. Well, maybe it was. It's all about how you defend yourself and putting yourself in a position to win if you're called on. We out of time?
10 minutes.
Sure.
I have a question.
Sure.
This is driving me crazy.
Yes.
That a lot of my colleagues who were in the clinic are no longer allowed to touch patients. They've been put in these administrative roles. So what changed? Because when I graduated, I was in clinic outreach. I don't know if they considered me like an aide maybe or something. And then I was out of the clinic for a while. I came back and just worked for a high school. And at that time, around 2012 to 2013, I would say within the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, now I'm hearing all these people saying, oh, I can't touch patients.
So
They just have
we've gone through everything. What's changed? Nothing. Nothing has changed. There is nothing in any of our laws or statutes or regulations that say you can't do any of those things. What's changed is the employer's internal policy. They are not.
The entire state. Like, it's like, because when I found out.
Well,
this is,
shame on us.
This is Katie, Katie.
Yeah.
Where she was the one telling me a lot of her colleagues were told they had to get their PTA. So they paid for it to get their PTA so that they could, and then I thought, oh, it's just that specific company. But after talking to people working for different organizations, the same thing.
So
happens.
who is responsible for our practice? We are. So if someone tells you you can or can't do something, tell them to go jump in a lake. It's our job. If we don't push back, if we allow physical therapists to say what we can do, or physicians, or nurses, or principals, or coaches, shame on us.
So there's nothing, I
That-
didn't miss anything. There's
that
no
doesn't mean-
major-
That a company can't have their policies that says you can't do it. This comes about as changes in Medicaid, Medicare, and insurance, and companies wanting to generate revenue. And as oversight got more strict, what was always fraudulent billing, the athletic trainer working in a clinic, the physical therapist submitting that service and being reimbursed for it. It was a physical therapist that was reimbursed for services they didn't produce. That was fraudulent from the beginning. Maybe the physical therapist didn't understand it or didn't want to see it. There is nothing in our regulation that says a physical therapist can supervise an athletic trainer, and they can't and they shouldn't. The fact that people or companies say, well, we love you, but since you're not generating revenue, you're out. Or if you become a PTA, now the PT can legally bill for those services. That's the relationship.
Okay.
Nothing has changed in what we can or can't do. What's changed is where the money comes from, and money talks.
So Medicare, Medicaid just got very strict about who was actually signing off and who was actually doing those.
That's my suspicion. I know at Mass General, there are a number of athletic trainers at Children's who work in children's sports medicine, and their compliance officer came down and said, well, they can't even act as a scribe. They can't take the notes because Medicaid defines who can document medical injuries. So, I think it's overprotective people. I think in private clinics, a lot of times it's turf war. If athletic trainers are allowed to demonstrate that they can produce, then that's a threat, so we don't let them. I still wonder what would happen if they billed for that service, because most athletic trainers don't even bother. So we don't even know if we could be reimbursed. Other questions? I just told you you're going to get sued. You don't have any questions? Remember, since there's always a chance to be sued, the good news is rarely are we sued. Why is that? Well, I said, athletic trainers are more and more being sued, but it's still relatively rare. Why do people sue?
Because they want money. They want
To get money. We ain't got that. Right?
Subject, have my loans.
Yeah, I mean, why come after? I mean, they'll go at school systems and we'll be named in that. They'll go at organizations, but we're not kind of pots of gold for lawyers. And if you're not a pot of gold, they're not going to waste their time on you.
Certainly not a bunch of
Thank you for your time, attention. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You too.